prophetic utterances over Israel in the entire Bible. And he was deceived. He operated under a spirit of delusion. He came to the people of Israel, and he couldn't defeat them by the words of his prophecy. So he told the king of Moab, lure them into sin, lure them into adultery, lure them into idolatry, and then you'll be able to defeat them on the battlefield. And that's exactly what happened. If you can't get them with the spirit of destruction, get them with the spirit of deception. And it's a warning for the church. It's a warning that we need to prepare for apostasy. The Apostle Paul says very clearly that the end will not come, and Jesus will not be revealed until there is a great falling away in the church. We have to examine our own hearts. Do we love the truth? Do we love the truth of Scripture? Do we love the truth of God's Word? And are we prepared to stand for the truth against the spirit of destruction? Are we prepared to pay the price? It cost Jesus his life to give us the truth of God's redemptive purpose, to fulfill the redemptive purpose of God. Are we prepared to give our lives for that truth? May God help us in these days. Thank you.
We live in a world that wants to be tolerant. We live in a world that wants to stamp out racism in all its forms. And for sure, these are noble ideals, and there have even been many successes in this arena, even in our own lifetimes. We've seen the Soviet curtain come down. We've seen the Berlin Wall removed. The apartheid regime in South Africa has been dismantled. And even in this country, the election of the first black president has to be seen as a symbol of the victory over America's racist past. But does this mean that anti-Semitism has been removed? And even though in many cases around the world, strict laws have been passed, such as in Germany, outlawing anti-Semitism in all its forms, a new form of anti-Semitism has sprung up in its place to replace what was seen as a very open, old version of anti-Semitism. And whereas classic anti-Semitism blamed the Jews for all the world's problems, this new form of anti-Semitism actually blames Israel. Professor Judea Pearl, who's actually the father of Daniel Pearl, put it this way. He says, anti-Semitism rejects the Jews as equal members of the human race. Anti-Zionism rejects Israel as an equal member in the family of nations. And there's a growing movement out there in the world today that does not accept Israel's right to exist as a nation. And in fact, they would like to see the state of Israel dismantled, just like the apartheid regime in South Africa. And in fact, they look to the example of South Africa as a model of how to dismantle the state of Israel. And they do this in three steps, as it were. The first is to discriminate against the state of Israel. The next is to delegitimize that state. And finally, then the state can be dismantled. And we're going to look at each of these and give you a little bit more understanding of how this campaign works. First, to discriminate against the state of Israel is to really feed a negative image for the public of the state of Israel. This is done through the media, this is done through international aid organizations, and this is done by intellectuals around the world. I want to look at the media first of all, because the media has played a big role in this over the past in projecting a very negative view of Israel. In fact, very It's, in many instances, a totally untrue view of the facts on the ground. And much of this also involves the dehumanization of Israelis in the conflict. There was just an example 2 months ago in the northern town of Samaria, where the Fogel family, pictured up here for you, were brutally murdered in their home. 5 of the family members were in fact murdered, including one of them being a baby who was murdered in its cot. And the response of the media you would have expected to be one of sympathy, outrage, horror, and a call for these people to be punished. Unfortunately, this was not the case. The New York Times carried a headline that read, "Suspecting Palestinians, Israeli military hunts for killers of 5 West Bank settlers." Completely dehumanized this family just into being settlers. The LA Times, in fact, blamed the settlements as provocation for the attack, while the BBC and CNN cast doubt on whether it was even a terrorist attack to start off with. All this meanwhile, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is the military wing of Fatah, which rules the Palestinian areas, had already proudly claimed responsibility for the attack. This is a serious problem for Israel. But no organization in the world has been more discriminating against Israel than the UN. In 1975, they passed the Zionism equals racism resolution, which basically set the tone for the last 3 decades at the UN. This is a picture of Chaim Herzog tearing up that resolution in the UN. From 2006 to 2007, the UN General Assembly passed 22 resolutions condemning Israel. It did not pass 1 resolution condemning Sudan while the genocide in Darfur was being carried on. In the Human Rights Council, more resolutions have been passed condemning Israel than all the other 191 member states combined. So today, Israel faces this serious campaign that tries to discriminate her. The next step of that is to really delegitimize the state, to try and say that it's not legitimate and it should be removed. CBN has done a fantastic video describing this campaign, and it is a global campaign. And I'm going to play that for you so you can get some more insight into how this is being orchestrated on a global level. The delegitimization campaign has been done on campuses around the world, mostly in North America. It derives from Canada originally. And just 2 months ago as well, there was Israeli Apartheid Week that was held in 50 different universities worldwide. The aim of this week is to promote the idea of divestment from Israel, sanctions against Israel, and boycotts. They want to see Israel isolated in the international community and presented as a pariah state, just like South Africa was. And reduced and weakened internationally, especially as how people view it, and that's finally then it can be removed as a state. We must give credit to the Canadian government. They actually spoke out quite strongly against this campus crusade, as it were, a kind of crusade. And on March 11, 2011, Jason Kenney, the Canadian Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Multiculturalism, had this to say about Israeli Apartheid Week. Like many Canadians, I remain deeply concerned about the events and activities associated with the so-called Israeli Apartheid Week. In recent years, Israeli Apartheid Week has become a fixture on Canada's university campuses, which all too often is accompanied by anti-Semitic harassment, intimidation, and bullying. He went on to say, criticism of Israel cannot, in and of itself, be regarded as anti-Semitic. However, if that criticism selectively condemns and denies the only Jewish state's right to exist, it can create a hateful environment. When it takes place during Israeli Apartheid Week, such scapegoating becomes yet another symptom of a worrying new acceptance of the vilification of Israel and of Jews around the world. And we can see clearly from his statement how there's that direct connection between this anti-Zionism campaign and the original anti-Semitism. Of course, intellectuals around the world and even former presidents have played into this whole delegitimization campaign. You've got here Jimmy Carter, who wrote his book, Peace, Not Apartheid, who very much proposes the idea that Israel is an apartheid state. And the question really for us is Israel an apartheid state today? Does it have all the makings of an apartheid state? And we're going to run, hopefully, another video for you that will answer that question.
The term apartheid comes from the Afrikaans word meaning to keep apart. Apartheid refers to a system of political, economic, and social segregation which was instituted in South Africa by the Nationalist Party under the leadership of D.F. Malan in 1948. Under the system of apartheid, Black people could not live in white areas, go to white schools or white universities, work in certain jobs which had been reserved for whites, or use the same amenities such as parks, beaches, or public transport. They could not marry white people, have physical relations with them. Black people could not be appointed to the country's civil or legal institutions, stand for political office, and most importantly, were denied the right to vote. Apartheid finally ended in 1994 after much international pressure, when President F.W. de Klerk initiated a series of reforms that led to the first democratic elections and the presidency of Nelson Mandela and his African Nationalist Congress government.
Joy that we can loudly proclaim from the rooftops, free at last.
A number of critics, including former US President Jimmy Carter, have accused Israel of being an apartheid state. In a state practicing apartheid, would Arab Muslims be able to both stand for and be elected to the national legislature? Would the entire Israeli Arab population be eligible to vote, let alone Arab women? What's more, would the majority of Israeli Arabs turn out to vote in national elections as they have done? Would an apartheid state allow several Arab political parties, who are often critical of the state, yet run for elections? Would there be any Arab judges on Israel's Supreme Court? Would the judiciary of an apartheid state be free from political interference? Would all the road signs in the country feature both Hebrew and Arabic? Would Muslim Arabs be free to attend Israeli schools and university alongside Jews in an apartheid state, and moreover, live side by side in its cities and rural villages? Would human rights organizations be free to operate openly in an apartheid state? And would the media be able to challenge all aspects of government policy and national identity? What's more, would an apartheid state allow its citizens to protest against perceived infringements on their liberties? The answer is clearly no. Israel is not an apartheid state. Despite accusations to the contrary, it is in fact one of the most tolerant and inclusive societies in the region, offering its Arab citizens more rights than they would experience under any of Israel's neighboring Arab Muslim governments. Israel and Zionism bear no resemblance to the apartheid policies of South Africa, and to argue as such is to insult the suffering of the myriad of black South Africans who were the true victims of the apartheid system.
Now, I grew up in South Africa, and my father, Malcolm Heading, who's sitting here today, spoke up against the apartheid regime, so much so that we were actually advised in the late 80s to leave the country for our own security. And where did we go? We went to Israel for 3 years. And so I know from my own experience that Israel resembles nothing like apartheid South Africa did in the 80s. And that's a fact that's proven on the ground. 20% of the population in Israel is Arab, and they can vote freely. They have access to the highest positions in Israel in many respects. So what is going on here? What are people like Jimmy Carter going on about, claiming that Israel is an apartheid state? And what it comes down to is they're not interested so much in what happens inside Israel. They're more interested in what happens with the Palestinians. Now, this is another strange situation, because isn't it that the Palestinians want their own state? In fact, the Palestinian areas today are mostly Judenrein. You won't find a Jew living in the Palestinian areas. It's not safe for them to live there. If a Jew was to go down into Gaza, they wouldn't live long. So what is really happening? Which side is really the apartheid state? And what we find is that this has nothing to do about attempting to set up some kind of state for everybody or everybody's rights in the region. It has everything to do with trying to delegitimize Israel and trying to dismantle the state and see it removed. And we have to open our eyes and be aware of what's going on, and we have to learn how to speak up and be knowledgeable on the subject so that we can confront it when we see it and take a stand about what's going on in the world and stand up for Israel when we have the chance and come to her defense as this campaign grows with momentum around the globe. So we too should make our voices louder in response and speak truth into the situation. We're going to break for lunch now. We'll have about 45 minutes. We'll come back at around just after 1 o'clock and start again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. As I said last night, it's wonderful to feel the warm welcome back here myself as a native son of the South. My good friend Mike Mott, who used to work with us in Jerusalem, he just asked me at lunch. It's the third time someone asked it in the past day, did you get some sweet tea? And I finally had to say, Mike, what other kind of tea is there? So just appreciate the warm welcome. Oh, I got an amen there. Okay. I've been asked to focus in on the political issues surrounding the Israeli-Arab conflict and helping us sort through them and understand them a little better. And I'd like to begin by reading Psalm 85, beginning with verse 10. Mercy and truth have met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed. Truth shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven. I think we saw in an earlier presentation some images, footage of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that helped the nation of South Africa get over the bitter years and legacy of the apartheid regime. And it is a good example of truth reconciling with mercy and getting over the wounds and binding them up, and a nation going on. And we can say that there is no peace in the Middle East today because there's been no truth, no facing up, addressing the true roots of the conflict. And you cannot have mercy kissing a lie. There's lies, the failure to face up to the historic facts, the facts that Israel has not only a 3,000-year-old connection with the land back to King David, but 4,000-year-old back to Abraham. The lies of the Palestinians' true intentions never faced up to some of the things we've been discussing and exposing here, the truth about Islamic religious theology and the way it is an obstacle to peace. The world leaders, the peace processors, they do not truly face up to these things. One good example was the Temple Mount denial that surfaced at the Camp David talks in 2000 and basically busted up those talks. When the Palestinian side, Yasser Arafat and his delegation refused to acknowledge that there was ever a Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And from that moment, the talks were over. And how can you deny this? And how much of the media coverage that you've seen of that moment focused on exactly why those talks broke up? Part of the battle for truth, as we're calling this, has to do with the media going for easy narratives. I can tell you, as a journalist myself, a lot of journalists are lazy. They don't want to really learn the facts. There's a David versus Goliath narrative, and Israel is this David, this giant picking on the Goliath. Many in the media are liberals. They come from a liberal background. They tend to root for the underdogs over who they perceive to be an oppressor. They also hold Israel to a double standard, a higher standard than they do the Arabs. These are some of the reasons why the media is always getting it wrong about Israel and why that affects world opinions. And here is a good example of it. Time magazine, September of last year, why Israel doesn't care about peace. And the article basically talks about how in Tel Aviv, the people are so carefree, they're so far from the conflict now, there's no bus bombings anymore. They just don't care about it. I can tell you the people of Tel Aviv are the most dovish and most willing to concede everything, and really the ones who would make peace with the Palestinians tomorrow because they don't want Arabs living in their neighborhoods. They want them to still live out in the West Bank, give them their state. And they're the ones who are begging for peace.